One 34 be advised, 9/20/27 associates with the suspect and the victim. West.
172, no water warrant.
You are listening to another edition of the Private Officer Talk Radio Network. Brought to you by Private Officer International, a security and law enforcement organization. Broadcasting today from Studio A. A production of Private Officer International. Today, on the legal side, is looking at the liability and possible criminal charges that a security officer could face if they're carrying a firearm in an unarmed post or contract or an area where firearms are not allowed by law. That's going to be our topic of discussion on this edition of On the Legal Side. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Rick McCann, founder and CEO of Private Officer International and Armor College. It's very important to understand that several factors are in play on our contracts. When you're a contractual employee, when you're employed by a contract private security firm, you have both the criminal aspects of the law and the civil aspects of the law that are in play in every contract situation. So let's begin first by looking at the obligation of the employer and the contract that they have with the client. Every client, customer of a contract security company, they negotiate back and forth as to what type of security do they want. What are the parameters of the security officer's duties? What is it that they're supposed to be doing? Is this going to be an armed or unarmed account? Will the security personnel be responsible for detaining or arresting or chasing or getting involved hands-on with anyone? Usually these parameters are discussed generally in a proposal format or initial sales contact and then memorialized in the actual agreement for service. So if you have a contract where the security officers are not supposed to be armed and they do carry a firearm, whether it's in their pocket or in their vehicle or maybe stashed in their briefcase or computer bag or wherever, then, we're looking at several serious violations, not only of the agreement, the civil aspect, but also possibly criminal charges. And that's what we really need to look at in this edition of From the Legal Side. It's very important that we understand that no matter how dangerous the scene is, no matter how dangerous the territory, the area, the community, the complex, the property, no matter what we think as an employee of the security company, we have to abide by the written agreement, the contract, as well as the law. I have heard many times through the years security personnel say, well, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And I thoroughly understand where they're coming from. I completely understand their perspective, especially in a dangerous assignment environment territory situation. You know, you're on a property that's known for drugs and crimes, has a lot of shootings or, people fire off rounds all the time. That's definitely very dangerous. It definitely puts our employees in harm's way. And I certainly understand how they could feel it's better to be armed. But let's talk about the civil violations. As an employee of that contract company, the contract specifies what you can and cannot do. And what both of those companies, both your employer and the customer, has agreed is to happen on the property. So they don't want their security personnel to be armed, and they want no firearms involved. Yes, more than likely it's because of liability. They don't want to be responsible for any shootings by the security officer, and that's understandable. They don't want to have to deal with any type of litigation because the security officer either justly or unjustified opened fire and shot or killed a person on their property. So they don't want to litigate that type of situation. Number two, they may themselves just not see the reason that a security officer needs to be armed. They may not deem it to be a very violent or criminal type atmosphere. They may not see it as being a dangerous property. They may not see what's the need. The security officer duties are very basic, mostly access control, and there's no need for him to have a firearm from their perspective. They're not thinking about officer safety. They're not talking about or thinking about security officers defending themselves. Should they get robbed? Should somebody shoot at them? They're not looking at it that way. They're looking at it from a money and liability standpoint, and they don't want the firearms. So if a security officer violates the terms of the agreement and carries a firearm onto the property, hides it in their pocket, their uniform, their lunch bag, wherever it might be, they're not only in violation of the contract, but if the company, the business, specifically does not allow firearms on the property, you could be violating the criminal law, especially if the property is posted no firearms, or if it's a government facility, a school contract, a post office, a federal contract that doesn't allow firearms, specifically post no firearms, then you would be facing a criminal charge, possibly even a federal charge if it's on federal property. So you have violations of the civil law. Something happens, you use that firearm, you pull out the firearm in a menacing way, police get involved, reports are filed, and now the client is calling your employer saying, what the heck? I told you, it's clearly written in the agreement, we don't want guns. What happened? How did you allow your employee to have a firearm? And one thing leads to another. Not only will your employer lose the contract, but he or she, the company, no matter how large or small, will probably be sued by the client, and even you individually can be sued. I know. You don't have anything, so they're not going to get anything. Well, that's not true because, as I've stated many times, in a civil lawsuit, once the judgment is handed down by the court, that judgment is good for a long, long period of time, and eventually they may put a lien against your house, your car. They may get a judgment against your payroll, and, eventually they will get their money if they win a judgment against you. It's very unlikely that a client or customer, especially where there's been an egregious act against their agreement, would just sit back and go, I'm not going to worry about it. I'll find another company. Because many of them will take some form of formal action civilly in the courts, or they may just cancel the contract and cost your company hundreds of thousands of dollars for the business. Plus, if they're a national or a regional company, that could really affect their business in other areas. The information gets out, or it's on the news, or the customer or client, he gets the message out through his social media, through his network, and all of a sudden, XYZ company, it's going to find it harder to get business because they breached their own contract. Contracts are not to be taken lightly. And I know that you might say, well, I didn't enter into that contract. I didn't sign that contract. That's somebody else that signed it. I don't have to obey it. I don't got to listen to it. I don't have to worry about it. I'm not even going to. It's not me. It is you. You're an agent of your employer, and thus you are bound by the same terms of that contract. You're an agent of your employer. You have to do everything the contract says. You have to make sure that you are adhering to the terms and conditions of a legal binding agreement. And if not, then both you and your employer could wind up in civil court and be held liable. Not only that, let's look at the more serious end of it. You bring a firearm in a property where it's supposed to be an unarmed account. You use it in an illegal way. You use unreasonable force. You use deadly lethal force. You use it in a menacing way. You're looking at much more than civil court, my friend. You're looking at criminal charges, possibly very, very serious charges. And when we come back from this break, we're going to break down the criminal liability that comes along with violating a civil contract. We'll be right back here from the legal side.
Doing drugs is like being on top of the world. Everyone says so. Everyone seems to be having one dandy old time. Hey, it's part of growing up. Or is it? Just think about this. Before you go and do something you've never done before, you just better know what you're jumping into.
Welcome back to this edition of On the Legal Side, from the legal side, about the legal side. It's all about the legal side of the law. And today we're talking about carrying firearms in an unarmed contract, the civil and criminal charges and liability, the seriousness of the consequences that a security officer could face. As I was saying earlier, I understand the perspective that if it's a dangerous contract, a dangerous environment, a dangerous community, that you want to be armed. You want to be able to protect yourself. But in a contract that specifically says no firearms, you are really putting yourself out there to suffer some great consequences, both in civil court as well as criminal charges. If you really feel that the assignment or the area is too dangerous, no one is forcing you to take that assignment. Well, I need a check. I need a paycheck. I need to pay bills. I understand that. But you don't want to break the law. How can you enforce the law if you're breaking the law? How can you be somebody who is a professional and you're breaking a contract? You're breaking criminal charges. So let's talk for a moment about the criminal side of bringing a gun to an unarmed post. Obviously, you never think that a situation is going to happen. You never leave home thinking, I'm going to shoot somebody, or I'm going to kill somebody, or I'm even going to get into a fight tonight. I mean, it's always a possibility in our line of work, but you never think it's going to be us or now. But sometimes things do happen that's out of our control and not on our timeline. So you have a firearm, something escalates, you get that gun, you use that gun, whether it's, in your mind, a legal use of force or not. If law enforcement deems that you use excessive force, you could be facing some serious criminal charges, everything from assault, aggravated assault with a firearm or felonious assault, shooting to maim, attempted murder, manslaughter, or even murder. Every year, sadly, more than 2,500 security officers are arrested. And of those 2,500, hundreds face criminal charges for assault, murder, attempted murder, aggravated murder, and so on and so forth. We just had a security officer in the past couple of days arrested for manslaughter. And in fact, this week, 3 security officers have been charged with second-degree murder because of shootings that they were involved in. If you use any lethal force and you're not justified, forget the civil charges, forget the civil court, forget about being terminated from your employment, forget about all of that liability and consequences you're going to have, because you'll be facing a whole new set of consequences, and that is facing criminal charges, facing a grand jury, facing a serious trial, potential prison time, maybe even incarcerated for life. What would have happened if you didn't have the firearm? Would you have just walked away? Would you have used some type of de-escalation skill? Would you backed off and called 911 and let police respond and take care of it? Sometimes carrying a firearm, some people, they really step out of line because they have that firearm with them. They do and say things that they never would do or say if they were unarmed. I've heard it said before that some people who carry firearms who are not properly trained or just aren't used to it, they have the Napoleon effect. All of a sudden they're bigger, badder, meaner. They become more aggressive. And that's what puts you in these serious, serious consequences, serious situations. When you pull a firearm and you have no legal justification, you're going to probably be charged. When you use lethal force and you're not in imminent danger, you're going to face criminal charges. It could be that you face serious time in jail, prison. It could be that you face life in prison. And sadly, we've even seen some security officers who have gone through death penalty cases because of their actions while on duty with a firearm. Yes, 100%, I believe that most security officers these days need to be armed. But unfortunately, most are not prepared. They're not trained. some, they just don't have the wherewithal of when and how to legally use lethal force. In this day and age, we need to be 100% sure about when we can use any type of force. Look at all the police officers being charged, investigated. Look at all the headlines. Can you imagine a security officer using lethal force, whether justified or not? How the media would play that up? How the people would really begin to protest, no less than protesting law enforcement. It's happened. It's happened recently. On the legal side, you may or may not have the law on your side. Even if you are justifiably correct in the use of force that you applied, you could still be sued. You could still be fired. You could still be out of a job. There's a lot of serious ramifications for any use of force, especially these days. An unarmed post, an unarmed assignment is unarmed for a reason, for a purpose. And when two companies have made an agreement that it's to be armed or unarmed, that's the bottom line. That's as far as it's going to go. You can't make it anything different. If you want to take the chances, the risk of packing a gun in an unarmed account, that's all on you. You'll also have to take whatever consequences come your way. I can't tell you not to carry a firearm or to carry a firearm. That's something you're going to have to decide. That's something you're going to have to weigh. The consequences, do they outweigh the risk? Do they outweigh the need? Does one justify the other? Only you are going to be able to answer that. From my perspective, I say don't take the job, don't take the assignment if you feel it too risky. I've been involved in many situations and have, over the years, as the owner of a security company, been on accounts that were unarmed that I just felt was so dangerous. Eventually, I either dropped the account or I got it renegotiated for armed or much more manpower. There's safety in numbers. It's important today, in this environment that we're in, this day and time, that we take safety serious, but we also take the law just as serious. If you're willing to break the law, if you're willing to not adhere to your client's agreements, then maybe you may be in the wrong business. And that's something for you to have to take a closer look at. Many civil and criminal penalties, consequences are waiting for you for violating a civil agreement. I caution you before you violate the terms of an agreement or violate the law. That's all for this edition from the legal side. I really hope that I've planted the seed and that you will adhere to the agreement and the laws and keep out of trouble. But more importantly, I hope that you stay safe, be blessed, and we will see you back here on the radio side. On the radio, coming up tomorrow, is a whole new edition of the Private Officer Beat. We got a lot of news and information that we'll be sharing with you. And we've got some events that we'll be talking to you about, as well as some brand new services. So don't miss it. Until then, stay safe. God bless. We'll see you back here on the radio.